Next up is Michelle Hanlon. Michelle is an attorney leading the way for the For All Moonkind movement, which is really one of the most important talks we've had here for bringing attention to something that matters to all of us now and in the future. What it is the idea is creating a UNESCO on the moon for the Apollo sites. Right now, those sites are unprotected and can be completely lost to history just by one inappropriate landing or somebody going and collecting souvenirs. So it's getting a lot of attention right now. We're honored to have you here. Yes, let's do that.
Oh. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Had the mute button.
I'm just waiting for the clicker. Well, I was going to start with what Pete Conrad said. Whoopee! I'm not the first person on this stage. I'm not the third person, but I am really proud to be in the footsteps of the people who have been on this stage these past 2 days. It's been really inspiring for me. My voice is cracking because I don't present a lot, so please bear with me. But it's just been a lot of fun for me to be here. I am a space lawyer. And I spent 25 years as an M&A attorney. I went and got my LLM degree in space law last year and became very passionate about this cause for all moonkind. We heard a little bit about the mythology of the moon. It's been adored throughout the ages by every culture, from ancient up to today, really. But it even reached Apollo 11. The Empress Chang'o is reputed to have stolen the potion for longevity, and she was banished to the moon. Thankfully, she wasn't there by herself. She also had a rabbit accompany her. But as they were approaching the moon, the Apollo 11 was told that one of the headlines had asked them to look out for the Empress and her bunny, to which Mike Collins responded, yes, they will definitely keep a close eye out for them. We've been transfixed by the moon even in recent culture. Doris Day, Frank Sinatra, the Honeymooners, Jules Verne. And centuries of science from around the world have got us to understand our moon and gotten us to the moon. Which brought us to the moon. And so with that giant leap came centuries of mythology, centuries of science, and all of humanity. It wasn't an American issue. It was a contest, but it wasn't an American achievement. It was a human achievement, and that one that's unparalleled. It wraps up all of our dreams and technologies into one step, and that's a step that we believe we really have to protect. Each of the Apollo missions is a first. Apollo 11, the first humans on the moon. Apollo 12 is the first precise landing on the moon. Apollo 14 was our first color video. 15, the first wheels. 16, lunar highlands. 17, which is also the most well documented, is the first scientist on the moon. So all of these firsts are things that we need to preserve and celebrate. They also left a lot of things on the moon. And one of the most amazing things, I think, is this disk, the size of a quarter, with messages from 74 leaders, sending their thoughts and prayers and wishes with Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong. They left the disk on the moon. They almost forgot to, apparently by mistake. Buzz kind of threw it out at the last minute. But the heartfelt messages almost all of them talk about peace and the wish that this achievement will bring peace to the earth and to mankind. And it talks about brotherhood, and they talk about celebrating this achievement. So 74 out of 200 nations might not seem that big, and several of those nations no longer exist. But Apollo 11, as much as came about because of a Cold War, it was really very much about peace and about mankind and about our world. It's an archaeologist's dream. First of all, when we're looking at humans, we look at the tracing Columbus, Polynesians across the Pacific. We are an exploratory, migratory animal. We've explored the earth. We should spend more time exploring the oceans, but at the same time, we're looking up. And this is our first step, literal step up. The Apollo lunar landing sites are the first archaeological sites with human activity that are not on Earth. They're frozen in time. They're undisturbed by wind or rain. They're untouched by any other human or any living organism since. And they represent one of the most important technological developments in human history. Only 12 human beings have set foot on the moon. Only 6 have driven on the moon. And right now, all of their traces are pristine. Oh, my best slide is missing. There it is. So this is what's coming. We're gonna, well, I see what I did, sorry. It's about to get crowded. We have the Google Lunar XPrize. We have 5 teams that are trying to get to the moon by December 2017. In addition, we have the teams who are no longer part of the Google XPrize, but are still planning on going to the moon. Some of them, including PT scientists, are actually planning on going to the Apollo 17 landing site. Thankfully, they've been working with NASA to talk about how to preserve this site, what can they do, how close can they get. But each of these teams has spoken with NASA. They've given Google Lunar XPrize plans for preservation, but this is just the beginning. And we have manned missions coming as well, as early as the 2030s. China, Japan, Russia. Elon Musk recently said we have to start at the moon to get to Mars. So in addition to the rovers that will be there within the year, we're going to have people there within the next 15 years. Which brings me to our moon tourism. This is a dramatization, obviously, but the truth is we're going to have tourists up there soon. And right now, there's nothing to protect those footprints. And we all know, we've all been to National Historic Sites, UNESCO World Heritage Sites. People like to take things. They like to take a piece of history. And so somebody will go up and, nobody will notice if I just take this little piece of that. The other issue is desecration. People walk around not realizing that their footsteps, if you land within a kilometer, the shards can impact the artifacts that are still there. So you land within a kilometer of the footsteps, you can perhaps even erase those footsteps. And people don't think about that when they're exploring something. And finally, of course, we had the auction of the lunar dust bag by Sotheby's for $1.6 million, which just set a tremendous value on any artifacts that somebody brings from the sites. So that potentially creates an entire market which would fund future lunar research, rovers. So this is our mission. To ensure the 6 Apollo lunar landing sites are recognized for their outstanding value to humanity and consequently preserved and protected for posterity by the United Nations and the international community as part of our common heritage. What do we have now? So under international law, we have 4 treaties that took nearly a decade to agree to, and they've been great. I mean, the People sort of diss the treaties and say, oh, you know, we have a lot of gaps. Yes, there are a lot of gaps in the treaties. But so far, they've kept the peace in space. And we have to commend the white men who negotiated these treaties in the 50s and the 60s, because they understood the importance of space, they understood the importance of peace in space, and they understood the importance of keeping space exploration open to everybody. Space is for everybody, and they knew that. Obviously, they had bigger things to worry about, like nuclear weapons and the space race and the Cold War, so they're silent about cultural artifacts. There's no discussion of what happens to something once it gets up there. A lot of stuff in orbit obviously burns out and comes down, like Sputnik, although the grapefruit is still up there, and so, you know, is that debris or is that an artifact? That's something that has to be decided. But the one thing that all of these treaties agree is that no nation can claim sovereignty in space. That you cannot claim any piece of space as your territory. In terms of protecting the sites, the U.S. Tried, or I should say, two representatives in the U.S. Congress tried to pass a law that would recognize the Apollo sites as a national park. Unfortunately, this flies completely in the face of the idea of no national sovereignty in space. To say that you can make a national historic landmark out of a piece of land that you cannot claim sovereignty over is like trying to slip it in under, you know, if you can't claim sovereignty even for protective purposes. So NASA produced in 2011 guidelines, and that's what the Google Lunar XPrize is relying on to make sure their competitors don't ruin the sites. PT Scientists has been working with NASA directly to make sure that they can reach the Apollo 17 site without hurting anybody, hurting any of the sites or artifacts. But they're unenforceable in their recommendations. And under international law, it's hard enough to enforce anything, but to have a recommended guideline, there's no reason for anybody to pay attention. And if you violate the guidelines, there's no sanctions. So there's a big distinction between the actual sites and the artifacts that are left on the moon, like this photo of Charles Duke's family. Anything left on the moon by a citizen is considered the property of that country who left it. So everything that Apollo missions left on the moon are US property, period. Under international law, there are some protections. So in speaking about, it actually comes under, funnily enough, the rescue agreement. If an object that belongs to the United States ends up back on Earth in somebody else's territory, the United States has the right to say, hey, that's ours, give it back. And you hope that the country in which it ended up is a friendly country, and they'll say, okay, you're right, we'll go prosecute this person or this company and make them return the artifacts. That's a big if. The other issue is, with the sites in particular, if we say, okay, that's our space object, that's a US space object, don't move it, you're essentially claiming the ground underneath the object as your own. So because that photo's there, does that mean that that little piece of territory that the photo was on can't be touched by anybody else? Which is, this is something lawyers love, you know. Is it territory? Is it not? You know, it's a postage stamp. Who cares? But that, you know, it obviously will grow into bigger issues as we move along. The sites themselves, no protection whatsoever. This is exploration of space. Space is for all. Everyone can use it. Right now, anybody could land a rover right there and just run over those tracks, and they'll be gone. There'll be new tracks in their place. This is what I was talking about a little bit before. The other thing that is protected as a space object, and this is anything that's left on anything that is launched into space is considered a space object. And so anything that's up there still as a space object belongs to the US, belongs to Russia, to China. nobody else can touch it. If any damage is done to it, the US can say, hey, China, you damaged our rover. But what is the damage at that point? It's cultural heritage, but can you monetize cultural heritage? Not really. So yes, it's a space object, but if we were able to proclaim the space object's cultural property, they would become a little bit more respected and protected. That's something that the US can do unilaterally, and it should do. It hasn't yet. Return of space objects is what I was talking about. Any space objects found should be returned. The US can ask for them back. Again, we have a very robust international cultural heritage and trafficking regime right now. And so the US should definitely proclaim all Apollo space objects cultural artifacts so they can be protected both under the international treaties that cover space law and the international treaties that cover illicit trafficking. They haven't done that yet, but that would not be a controversial move. What about the sites? So what can we do? Like I said, you cannot appropriate any territory in outer space. But we have the UNESCO World Heritage Convention, the Taj Mahal, the Grand Canyon, the Great Wall of China. They're all protected. So why don't we just go to the UNESCO World Heritage Convention and say, okay, let's make the Apollo sites part of World Heritage. Unfortunately, under the convention, you can only nominate territory that's within your national sovereignty. So again, another great lawyer thing. You can't, if the US were to say, please make these Apollo sites UNESCO World Heritage sites, any other country in the world is going to say, well, you can't nominate them because they're not yours. So this is just an example. This is in the, I'm going to pronounce it wrong, Ngorongoro Conservatory in Tanzania. It's the very first footstep that we know of that gives evidence that our first bipedal walking. We think that that footstep on the moon should get the same protection as this one. So I'm ahead of myself with the slides. We have approached UNESCO. UNESCO has a very tough problem, as you can imagine, with a lot of territories terrestrially in terms of who owns what should be considered heritage. And so they have actually said, the outer space regime is a little too gray and slippery for us. We really don't want to get involved. Can't blame them. So what do? We haven't had an agreement on space since the 1970s. The agreements that we had actually put in took 10 years to negotiate. The last agreement, the Moon Agreement, which actually talked a little bit about commercial space and how we would regulate mining and grabbing resources, has only been signed by 16 countries, none of which are spacefaring countries. How are we going to find a common ground to talk about cultural heritage, which is not nearly as dire as the weaponization of space, which brought us all to the table back in the 60s. So why did we form? We know that the international community is not working well through the United Nations. Everyone disses the United Nations and says, oh, they're useless, they don't do anything. You have to step back and realize that the United Nations are us. We send people to the United Nations to represent us. And so the people who are representing us in the United Nations aren't understanding or aren't getting any public outcry about space. Why should anybody at the United Nations talk about space when people on the ground aren't talking about space at all? This isn't what's on the mind of people. We believe Apollo went to the moon with peace and hope for all humankind. It's not just the US. We created an international board. We really think that we have an opportunity to make everybody remember that space is for everybody. And somebody said it earlier yesterday, diversity in space means diversity of countries as well as diversity of gender and race and so forth. We need to get as many people together and into space as possible, because think of all the different, I look at the ideas that have come up in this room alone. If we were to open this up, and if we were able to open this up to different nations, think about people, you know, in Botswana, Ghana, which just created its own satellite, or Nigeria with its own space agency now. You know, what they could bring to this table in terms of dreams and imagination that we could actually make happen. So we want to awaken international cooperation. We have a three-pronged strategy. The first is what I was talking about. This is a grassroots effort. Our politicians aren't going to talk about space unless we make them talk about space. So our first prong is education and inspiration. We've got a concerted marketing effort to broaden awareness and encourage youth to engage in space. I was really shocked to hear, I think Mike talking about his student, 5th grade, who didn't believe we'd been to the moon. I mean, that's, to me, I have 2 sons, both older now, but I think I had the moon books out, you know, just in their bedrooms. I don't even know how you grow up in this civilization without, as David Brin said, just, you know, being so proud to be the ones that put somebody on the moon. From the legal standpoint, which is my noodling, we have legal scholars from all regions of the world. We actually want to draft a Human Heritage of Space Convention. We're not going to go to the UN and say, oh, you know, you got to do this. We're going to go to the UN with a drafted document that has been approved by, we hope, the Chinese Space Agency, the Russian Space Agency, NASA, so forth. And we're working with policy and technology guys, again, with the space agencies. So we really want to have a package that we can take to the UN that's pretty much pre-agreed. So space is not just for billionaires. Space is for everybody. Our marketing campaign will include experiential events, which will raise awareness of private and national space activities. We want to make, again, space relevant to the decision makers. And we want to have an interactive outreach with a global campaign that celebrates common human heritage. And I'm delighted to introduce some of the ads that our team has put together. So this says, that's one small step for man and one giant mistake if we don't protect it. And the fine print says, right now, plans to send civilians and vehicles on the moon threaten to desecrate 6 pristine lunar landing sites. The UN has safeguarded other irreplaceable property here on Earth. Doesn't the moon deserve the same protection? Take the next small step. Visit us at forallmoonkind.org if you agree. This, again, we're not asking for the moon, just certain parts of it, and with the same content. What could possibly happen if we don't protect the 6 lunar landing sites? The fine print says, nothing good. I don't know if you can read, that's the plaque on eBay. Because if parts of the moon are up for sale, 6 pristine historic lunar landing sites could be forever desecrated. The UN has safeguarded other irreplaceable property here on Earth. Doesn't the moon deserve the same protection? Go to forallmoonkind.org if you agree, and place a bid for the good of all humankind. This says, we wouldn't do it down here. Why would we do it up there? Fine print says, commercial exploration could desecrate 6 pristine lunar landing sites unless you help protect them now. Same idea. We wouldn't do it down here. Why would you do it up there? And again, I thought, it's exactly what could happen up there, right? Probably scientifically engineering, it probably couldn't, but you know, that's what we like to think of. But this is the kind of imagery that we want to use to get people thinking, and not just about Apollo, but recognizing what we've done in space and how much more we have to do. So on the legal side, we have the Human Heritage of Space Convention. We have a lot of precedent, the UNESCO World Heritage Site, Underwater Heritage Convention, Annex 5 to the Protocol on the Antarctic Treaty. Nations have come together to agree we need to save our cultural heritage. So we know we can get an agreement, very basic agreement. We have an advisory council led by Humaid Al-Shamsi and Gilles Doucet, who are focused on identifying decision makers and thought leaders in regions all around the world, so that when we're either drafting together or they're constantly getting drafts from me that say, okay, what do you think? Will this fly? Will that fly? And we're also going to open in the next month an online forum. We're open to all comments and suggestions from technological to legal to marketing. I mean, so far I've gotten suggestions, oh, we should put a dome over the sites. And I have no idea if that's even possible. It sounds like it is. The cost would be exorbitant, and I'm sure with all the other things going on, the idea of putting a dome over Tranquility Base is probably not going to be a big budget item for anybody. But we welcome all that, and the website will be up with the forum. Our goal is to present to the UN in summer 2018. And we hope to present them with a plan that's already been agreed so that they can't turn it down. The plan will include things like, right now the idea is we're going to start with Tranquility Base and the 6 Apollo lunar landing sites, but we have to recognize that other countries have done stuff in space as well. We have the Russian rovers and the Chinese rovers up there. What we need people, anthropologists, to sit down and decide what should be protected, what shouldn't be protected. We need to balance between, well, are all 6 sites, are they going to, ruin a colony, a settlement that we want to build? What if this settlement comes within a kilometer of the site? We need people who know anthropology and engineering and astronautics to make these decisions. So that's what our Heritage Convention will do. Create a committee that will look at, particularly at cultural sites and designate them and protect them. And like I said, we'll get the policymakers to agree in advance. Starting point, obviously, will be the NASA recommendations. That's what we're going to ask comment on from other space agencies. And we hope to be out of business in 2019. We would like to see Tranquility Base protected before the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11. And, in legal terms, that is like, yeah, I mean, my legal friends laugh, but we're going to get it done because we are the lucky generation. As Walter Cronkite said, I don't have to read it. I want my grandchildren to walk by the Apollo 11 Lunar Landing Site Museum and ooh and ah over those footprints. Remarkable pro bono marketing team, Lean and Mean, my amazing legal team, and the end.
That was great. All right.
Will the proposed convention affect attempts to clean up space junk from orbit?
Absolutely. I mean, I know I have a colleague in Adelaide who really wants to make the convention cover things like the grapefruit. But again, it's one of those things that we are going to have to decide. We need to, our initial draft of the convention will ask for the universe, basically. And we're going to get pushback. But the environmental issues are very intertwined with the artifact issues because this is all space junk in real life. And we're going to have to find a balance between the two.
Hello. Sorry. I have no problem with any of the things that you've talked about, but I do have, it gives me an anxiety, and I'll tell you why. I was very much aware of the efforts to pass the Moon Treaty back in 1979, 1980. In fact, I was involved in a policy group opposing it. The reason for opposing it is very simply that if everybody owns something, then nobody owns it. And I'm very much in favor, as most of the people in this room are, of the expansion of humankind into the solar system and beyond. What the Moon Treaty tried to do was basically to say that nobody could own anything, not only no sovereignty, no ownership, and it was a serious threat to the utilization of anything. And the other thing to say is that any time something happens that alters something, it's a potential historic location. There are many, as you said, many historic locations on the moon, well, a fair number now. And every time a new spacecraft, the X Challenge, lands on the moon, that's another historic place. You've alluded to a little bit of intent to have a body of committee or something that would draw the distinction, but have you encountered any, I mean, I don't know, what would you have to say about all of that as a controversy?
So the Moon Agreement, as I understand it, it absolutely said, yes, everything belongs to everybody, but it wanted to set up a regulatory body, something like the Deep Sea Mining Act, to say, okay, you're going to get stuff out of the moon. Let's figure out how we're going to do it and how we're going to share it. I would not have signed the Moon Agreement either if I were the U.S. policymaker. I can't speak for the whole board because we have a diverse board. I personally support the Luxembourg and the U.S. laws, which say if you mine it, you own it. You know, okay, you can't own the surface of the moon, but if you're able to extract some resources out of it, we understand you need to get your investment back. So the problem is there's people out there who don't believe that, who think, okay, if you mine it, it's still ours because that's a piece of the moon, so you have to share it with everybody. Those two thoughts are going to buck heads. This is one way to get everybody to the table before we have a war because Naveen Jain has claimed an asteroid and his Chinese counterpart has claimed the other side. And all of a sudden, the US and China are at a war protecting their business interests. I don't know what the answer is. I think that this is a first step. If we can agree on how we should approach protecting things, then we can start to agree on, we can start to make everybody realize, okay, nations can't afford to mine the moon right now. Private companies can, or they have a better ability at this point, capability, financial capability. So we want to encourage that, and we want to encourage exploration. So you can't sit down and say to them, okay, go ahead, yay, now give it all back to us. But the problem is right now, there are no laws, and if a company goes up and does that, they'll be in court for the next 15 years. We don't want them in court, we want them in orbit. We need, people hate lawyers, people hate rules, but we need some rules to protect those companies. And to me, this is a first step to protecting not just the sites, but all of our private interests and the people who explore responsibly.
Michelle, a question and a quick comment. How is any of this enforced, assuming you actually get the UN to accept whatever you write? And the comment is there's a USC professor that you or others may know, Madhu Thangalevu, who is a space architect and engineer. He runs a design studio class for graduate architects and space engineers. And 2 or 3 years ago, he had a student design a protection plan for the Apollo lunar landing site. So, and they presented it on the space show and with photographs and everything. I mean, design photographs.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So they had domes over the sites themselves, transparent domes, and the visitors to the site could only visit within a reasonable distance inside some sort of like glass or transparent subway car that took them up to X feet away from where they were. You couldn't obviously get out because it's an environmentally controlled unit, and you could see it all from through the dome that's protecting it and inside your transparent car, and that was the students' design for how to protect it. So obviously, unbelievably expensive to do that, but a very cool design nonetheless. And if you haven't reached out to Madhu at USC, he ought to be a guy that you want to
Absolutely,
reach
yeah.
out to. He's a great guy and loves to participate.
Thank you, I absolutely will.
All right, I've got to draw this to, we've got to move this forward, and Michelle's going to be here today, so we can
Absolutely.
feel free to have a conversation with her. That's the whole point of being here, is to be able to engage.
Thank
like
you
this.
very much, everybody. I
Thank
really
you
appreciate it.
very much. We're super happy to have you here. Very important. I mean, I'm watching that presentation, I'm thinking, my God, if anyone messed with Apollo 11 site, I was
I like
getting
love
choked
myself,
up.
right?